entrepreneurial way to live, creating something yourself,
yes,
is high art in America. It is what has created our prosperity.
You say that I'm so pleased to be here. I thank Business Week and Scott Schuster again for permitting me to address the Business Week conference. The first time that I've done this with Business Week in Asia. It gives me a particular pleasure to come to Taiwan because the most interesting interview that I conducted for my book was with Mr. K.T. Lee, who many of you know was the father of the Taiwan economic miracle, the Minister of Economic Development and Finance in Taiwan back in the early days. And I asked him, what's it take to make a country prosperous? What's the secret? And he said, I had one great advantage in being the Minister of Economy in Taiwan, and it was that I never took a course in economics. To be a bit contrarian, I think that my message is somewhat the same about business. One of the great advantages, perhaps, of entrepreneurs is they haven't been to the Harvard Business School. So that's kind of like just setting the stage for what I have to say, and I'm sure many of you will disagree with that. Pleasure to be back in South Africa once again. Principles here to think about. All companies have a startup phase, entrepreneurial phase. They go into a period of high growth if they survive the first couple of years. When you grow, what happens? You get big, you take on more people, you have a few more committees, a few more procedures, you become a bit bureaucratic. If that gets out of control in the company, you go into a period of plateauing, slowing down, ultimate demise, as the 84% of the big American companies have done this century. So I've devoted the last 10 years of my life to trying to understand that left-hand side, what I call the magic of entrepreneurship, as contrasted to the science of management. But one has to stand back and wonder, what is the value of all this management education we're giving people? In fact, I've come to the conclusion that if we start training enough Germans and Japanese to be MBAs, we may have a chance again, you see?
There is a huge expectation here that you do not control your own destiny. Huh? Entrepreneurship allows you to do that. If you fail at entrepreneurship, you have no one to blame but yourself, which is a good feeling to have. On the positive side, every one of you in this room and everyone in the world should have the knowledge and the confidence to know that if you absolutely have to, you can defend yourself, you can support your family, you can create your own destiny. I started a business in 1983 with this fellow, Tom Peters. Those of you that are over 45 years of age might even remember that name. He wrote In Search of Excellence, the top-selling business book in history. And I knew Tom Peters before he was so famous, and I started a business with him to create a training seminar for corporations based on his book. The book had sold 6 million copies in 1982, which was the biggest selling book in the history of American publishing, except for the Bible, right? So I said to myself, even though I had a pretty nice job at the time, I said to myself, this can't miss. This is too hot. So I quit a really good job, put a big mortgage against my house. My wife to this day has probably never forgiven me, right? But I started this business with Peters. A year and a half after this business started, Business Week magazine, and this gives you one point here. If anyone ever brings you an idea that seems too good to be true, watch out. 18 months after I started this business, trying to sell these seminars around the world, Business Week did an expose on that book, In Search of Excellence. Maybe some of you might remember that. The headline of the cover on Business Week was, "Oops, we made a mistake." The book, they said that 1/3 of the great companies that this guy Peters had written about were near bankruptcy only 2 years after the book had come out. And I learned this, I was in Tokyo trying to sell the seminar to Texas Instruments Japan. And the Texas Instruments guy, Japanese guy, he held up the copy of Business Week magazine and said, "Mr. Farrell, have you seen this week's issue of Business Week?" And I said, no, I really haven't. And he says, well, you should read this, and also, we're not interested, right, in your seminar. So immediately I said to myself, well, number one problem was I need a new product. This is going to sink like a stone in the lake, right? The second thing, more important to us here for this conversation, if the best-selling business book in history didn't hold up for even 24 months as the truth, where are we going to find the truth about how to grow a business, how to keep a business vibrant? What is the truth? The final crowning glory for me on my research was the great, wonderful Peter Drucker. I do love, he died several years ago, but he saw a talk like this, and he stood up afterwards, and I thought, if Dr. Drucker, the world's greatest management expert, comes up and says, this guy Larry is an idiot, you know, it's going to be another Tom Peters Business Week moment for me, right? He could ruin my career for the second time, the second visit. Instead, Dr. Drucker stood up and said, Larry's onto something here. Bigger is better is a big myth. The best, he said, went on to say, the best companies in America are the mid-sized companies, not the giants and that sort of thing. And Larry Farrell has explained why.
We have Mr. Larry Farrell. Larry is the chairman of the Farrell Company, started 28 years ago. And in the 28 years since then, it has trained more than 5 million people, so more than the entire population of Ireland, in entrepreneurship and in how to grow, how to start, grow, and force grow businesses to success. It means that the Farrell Company has actually trained more people in entrepreneurship than any other agency, organization, company, or university anywhere in the world. And Larry will be addressing us in a while.
Yes, thank you. It's a tremendous pleasure to be back in Sligo. I want to thank Terry Scott, president of IT Sligo, a longtime friend of mine, Niall McAvoy, head of the Innovation Center, for having me back again. And I do want to make a few quick comments. I appreciated Steve's comments very much, and I will try to build on that. You probably read The Economist magazine this week, the little blurb on the Irish economy, saying that it's the pessimism perhaps of people in Ireland that's the main trouble. Perhaps the situation there, they claim that the Irish economy is well set for a good rebound, you see. And I like The Economist. You don't usually get positive, upbeat notes like that out of The Economist magazine, but that was nice. It said actually, an optimistic entrepreneurial spirit has emerged in Ireland that will not be crushed by a few years of recession. Hallelujah. Absolutely true. I was driving over this afternoon from the hotel, realizing that this is actually my 5th recession that I'm in since I've been working. And after 4 or 5, you get used to them. This one is a little bit more severe, but they're basically the same. They come and they go, all right? 73, 83, 91, 03, and now 08, 9, and 10. So this is the 5th recession I've been in, and I'm still standing, you see? So it's nothing to get too upset about. Now, the Farrell Company, I'll just say a word or two so you get the context here. I am an absolute zealot, missionary for entrepreneurship. All right, that is my whole life. I've been doing the same thing for 28 years, so excuse me if I'm a bit prejudiced about it, all right? But I really believe, I don't actually believe that entrepreneurship will cure cancer, but comes close, all right? We'll come close to it. We have trained over 5 million people. I'm very proud of that. We work in 9 languages, very international. But that happens if you stick to your knitting for 28 years and still do the same thing. You know, I'm not one that goes from one product to another, to another, to another. I wanted to be good at one thing and try to focus on that. So my entire talk and any answers here will be a bit favored toward the role of entrepreneurship in the global economy today and the power that it brings. But in our company, we have 3 distinct markets that we work in. I want to mention them quickly. Government markets, trying to create an entrepreneurial economy, whether it's a city, a region, or a country. That has become extremely popular over the past 10 or 15 years.
mainly because governments have found that it's a bargain, it's a good investment. Like in New York City, one of our clients is New York City. They say there that to keep a family on welfare in New York is about $20,000 a year. To send one bright student up to Harvard or MIT is about $30,000 a year. It costs the city government to provide the scholarship. To keep one criminal in jail 1 year is $40,000. And to start a new company, a small business, the average cost is $14,000. So this is a good investment. They can start almost 3 companies for the cost of one criminal, right, in jail for a year. I like the way they think, but government-funded economic development projects are truly taking the world by rage in terms of economic theory and economic development activity, and that's, of course, how I met Terry Scott first up in Belfast. Second market, and Steve is singing music, the corporate market. Our clients are IBM, Coca-Cola, American Express, those kinds of companies, big companies. And why are they training middle managers to be more entrepreneurial on the job? And Steve said it correctly. You have to manage your own career. You're a bit of a free agent in the world today. You go from one company to another, perhaps. You're really an entrepreneur inside a corporate world. And these are the kinds of young people that IBM's looking for. They are not looking for sleepy bureaucrats anymore, of course. They're looking for people who do not expect a handout, do not expect a lifetime guarantee of a job, et cetera, et cetera. So entrepreneurial education actually is quite good in the corporate arena, corporate market. The third area is for individuals, which we do primarily through universities and schools, such as IT Sligo. We work with Cambridge, MIT, Caltech in California, Ateneo in the Philippines, KIBS in India, and with 2 major universities. The biggest university in China is Jilin, and we provide the curriculum there for their entrepreneurship training. So we know the university training of students market quite well also. Now, in these 3 marketplaces, I want to mention why this is so pervasive, and entrepreneurship is in a global revolution today, and that's why it provides such opportunity for young Irish people, and old, not just young. There's hope for all of us. On the country level, the national economy level, the greatest finance minister of the 20th century, everybody would acknowledge, is K.T. Lee of Taiwan. He took Taiwan from a speck of nothing in 1949 to the richest per capita country in the world by the year 2000. He's a fabulous person. I interviewed him 3 hours on tape about 10, 15 years ago for one of my books. And I asked him, Mr. Lee, what is the reason for your success as economics minister of Taiwan? You've been so successful. They had, for 50 straight years, 9.2 GDP growth. And 2.2% inflation growth. This is an unbelievable miracle, economic miracle. His answer was twofold. He said, the first thing that helped me as economics minister was I never had a course in economics. Right? And that's one. Right? The second was that in Taiwan, we understood that the only way out of our dilemma as a very poverty-ridden country in 1949 with no resources was entrepreneurship. So we had to honor and encourage the Taiwan entrepreneurs in every conceivable way we could do that. And those are the 2 reasons for success. Don't get hung up in economic theory, right? And honor entrepreneurs in your society. In terms of the company, it's important to note that among the Standard & Poor's 500, that's equivalent to the Fortune 500, the listing of the biggest companies in the U.S., the family-owned companies, the family-dominated companies, such as Microsoft and Apple and Walmart and Ford Motor and Walgreens and Wrigley Gum, those companies, they outperform the publicly traded, professionally managed companies by about 25%. They've been doing that for 40 years. So even if you're a big company, there is still room to be highly family entrepreneurially oriented in the company. All right? So I think that's important to remember. At the individual level, and perhaps the most important quote I would offer up today is from Steve Jobs. And you know, Apple Computer, this is an amazing story. They fired him 20 years ago because he was, they said, well, an entrepreneur can't run a $1 billion company. You're just a computer geek. What do you know, you see? So they fired him, and then Apple just about went under. You know, remember the story? They hired this idiot from Pepsi-Cola to come in and run the company, and he just about drove it in the ground with his theories and so on. He went to Harvard, like I did, Harvard Business School, so they'll tell you something about that. Steve Jobs says that managing, while it's important, managing is the easy part of running a company. Inventing the world's next great product is what's hard. Right? That is an important, fundamental message for everybody. Not just for entrepreneurs, but for companies. The real goal is creating products and services that the world needs. That's the goal. And there is absolutely no reason why the next Steve Jobs should not come from Sligo. There's no reason, or Bill Gates, right here. You don't need to move to New York to do that. What you need is to have a great idea, a great product, and just learn how to franchise it or export it or whatever, you know, as Steve was indicating, to go fly around the world and meet people and set up an operation and so on. It's not that hard, right? So remember that. Managing is the easy part of business. Inventing great products is what's hard, and that's where all the payoff is. You know, inventing products the world wants to buy. Now, I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch from the American perspective of what went wrong in the last 20 years. Something went wrong in the U.S. economy, and we all thought in 1992, you remember 92 when the Berlin Wall came down? I don't know how you felt here, but we in America felt we're facing 100 years of peace and prosperity. We won. We won. It's over. Game over, you know. Checkmate. See? So we're all going to be happy and prosperous and free and easy and so on. Here we are 20 years later. We're in the worst recession since the 30s, and we're fighting 2 wars we can't win. You see? So what happened to that idea? You know, so it's a sobering thought that only 20 years ago we were all so excited about that we thought we had won the peace and so on, won the economy. The fact is, 30 million high-paying U.S. jobs have left the U.S. over the past 30 years. Those jobs are never coming back. Let's face it. As Steve said, they're in India, they're in Brazil, they're in Mexico, they're in China. They're never coming back, right? Big problem for the U.S. 25 years ago, the 3 biggest employers in America were General Motors, the world's largest maker of cars, IBM, the world's largest maker of computers, and Sears, the world's largest maker of electrical appliances. Today, our 3 biggest employers in America are Walmart, they're selling products made in China, UPS, the delivery company, they're delivering those products made in China, and McDonald's, and they're flipping wonderful hamburgers still. Look at the change that young people in America are facing in terms of the kind of jobs that are available in that country. So if you want to be destined to flip hamburgers, then you don't go to school, you don't learn a trade, you don't learn a skill, you just go flip hamburgers or you work at Walmart for minimum wage type thing. Number 4, wages as a percentage of our national GDP in the U.S., wages are at the lowest level since 1947 of the national economy. Our corporations are still doing well. Dividends are rising again, right? But our working class people are suffering. You know, the middle class who are making those electrical appliances and automobiles, they're suffering greatly. Right? And of course, on top of that, we have the current global recession. So there's a lot of bad news, you can say, from the American point of view, and we could be very pessimistic. Some people could be very pessimistic about it. The good news is we are in the midst of a tremendous entrepreneurial revolution. Actually, in my opinion, started about 1985, 1990, but it has really taken hold as China and India have come on board into the modern world. Right? Every economist in the world today agrees that the engine of prosperity is small business for every economy, including China. That's good news. 80 to 90% of all new jobs in the world are created by entrepreneurs and small businesses. We know that's a fact. We are all operating in a global economy. As I said, there's no reason you can't make a product and sell it anywhere in the world from Sligo. There's absolutely no excuse for not doing that, right? You've got the education, the skills, and so on to do that. The advantage the entrepreneur has is that there are these huge niche markets, and Steve may relate to that. There are markets, $100 million markets, let's say, that are actually too small for the IBMs of the world to worry about. That leaves a tremendous opportunity for us. Or even a $25 million market. Right? The big pharmaceuticals, they can't think that small in health services. But we can, as a small entrepreneurial health care company, we could come up with a nice little simple product that has a $25 million market in which there's no competition from the big players. So niche markets are a huge friend of the entrepreneur in the world today. So we're very happy when we see the companies, the Fortune 500 get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Leaves more and more space to us. The world is actually awash in startup capital. Many of the venture capital funds in the San Francisco area have closed some of their funds. They can't find enough good ideas, so they've closed off some of their investors. Money is $14,000 the average cost of starting a business in America. This is nothing. Anybody can do this. Anybody with 2 credit cards can start a business, you see. I wouldn't advise that, but it's possible. I opened my first office overseas in London. I put $5,000 in it, 1984. Never put another penny in. Opened an office in the Philippines. I got a customer first. They financed the opening. I mean, there are ways to operate when you're on a shoestring that you can do wonderful things in international networking. The other thing we know about entrepreneurial activity is it's not rocket science. Right? You don't need an MBA to do this. I don't actually know what you need an MBA for, but you don't need it to do this. Right? There's 3 to 4 million new entrepreneurs a year, so it can't be that hard to do. You know, a lot of people do it. You know, number one reason for new entrepreneurs in America, they lost their job. It's like economic necessity. You know, it's just not that they were born this way, and so on. The MBA syndrome, I make jokes about it, but I mean the MBA syndrome is dying. When we learned in America that from 45 to 85, that 40-year period, we lost 30% of our world market to Japan and Germany. And we were producing 600,000 MBAs a year, and Japan and Germany did not produce a single one. And we sat there and scratched our heads in America and said, how the hell did that happen? They don't have any MBAs. How did they take our markets like that? You see, all the leaders of German and Japanese companies were engineers. They were product people. They understood products. We understood management. You see the difference, big difference. Okay, last point, and the most important point, I think, for Irish people, particularly young people, is that entrepreneurship is different than going to work in the corporate world. When I left Harvard Business School, 65% of all Harvard Business School graduates either go to work for J.P. Morgan or they become a consultant. That's what they do, 2/3 of we call the best and the brightest, right? And so I became a consultant. What I saw after 5 years of consulting with big companies was that almost every assignment I was on, we made the situation worse for the client. We had no idea what was wrong with these clients, right? And the fact was that these clients were too big and had lost their entrepreneurial drive, their entrepreneurial spirit for product development and so on. They had become like government agencies, bureaucracies, and so on. So what entrepreneurship is to me it's the ultimate meritocracy. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter what country you're from. It doesn't matter too much where you went to school. It doesn't matter who your parents are. If you have a good idea in this world today, you cannot be stopped. And this is good news for young people. And this is why entrepreneurship is more important for poor people than rich people. Rich people, or let's say middle class and above, which I presume most of us, all of you look rather well fed, so I think we're in pretty good shape here, right? We have options, and even our children probably have options. But poor kids don't have options. Entrepreneurship can offer that to the poorest level of society. If you have a good idea and you're willing to work, you cannot be stopped. Thank you very much. Here's Disney, great quote. The inclination of my life has been to do things and make things which give pleasure to people in new and amazing ways. By doing that, I please and satisfy myself. There's the 4 principles. The inclination of my life, sense of mission. making things, products for pleasing people, customers, product customer, in new and amazing ways, innovative, creative, something different. You know, that's the key for him. And by doing that, I please and satisfy myself. I am inspired by my work. I don't need to go to a Tony Robbins seminar. I'm inspired by making cartoons. You see, I love this.
Is there a cultural difference, Larry, in Ireland to other countries that you work in doing the kind of thing that Danuta and Steve are describing?
I don't think so. I was going to say that the advantage Ireland has, in my view, is you have such a wonderful brand around the world. You do. I mean, still, yeah. You know, you do. Imagine to take Danuta's example. If we're sitting in Paraguay and we're trying to decide how can we go international, no one wants to work with a Paraguayan. They're all criminals. We know that. You know, they're corrupt. You know, they're the most corrupt country in South America, by the way. Interesting example. You'd bring that up.
Yeah, I did say we're not in Paraguay.
The main business in Paraguay is stealing cars in Brazil and bringing them into Paraguay. That's the main business. Anyway,
I apologize now to anybody
I'm
from
sorry. Yeah. All due respect, all right? Anyone from Paraguay. But Ireland, Irish people have a tremendous brand in the world. I got very interested in what creates growth in companies, and I got interested in the entrepreneurial side of business, thinking maybe there's lessons there we all should learn. And I started a company to do that, to research and teach people about the entrepreneurial practices of great entrepreneurs and how they create and grow their businesses, which I think is something more important to learn than what we learned at the Harvard Business School.
So there are some things you didn't learn. So what does Ray Kroc know, McDonald's, or Steve Jobs, Apple, Sir Richard Branson, Virgin Air? He makes records, he makes
and Jimmy
phones.
Pattison.
Jimmy Pattison
here in Vancouver.
You know him, he's hired you.
Yeah, believe it or not, a great entrepreneur like Jimmy Pattison has actually hired my firm to come in and actually teach his top 200 executives a bit about entrepreneurship. And I think Jimmy, and like a lot of great entrepreneurs, they like to have some outside voice perhaps because they beat this drum all day long, but if they can get an outsider to come in and talk about it, it may be more useful to them. So that's what we've done with Jimmy.
Plus there's some perks. You get to have lunch or dinner with President Clinton because he always brings in some pretty high-profile players to those conferences.
He certainly does. He certainly does. I met Clinton 3 years ago in Tennessee where the Pattison Group Conference was held that year. It was quite interesting. You know?
I bet. What did you ask him?
Well, good question. At dinner, I sat next to Clinton. Jimmy was here, Clinton and me. And I said, this is my one chance in my life to ask a former president a direct question. What should I ask him? Now, he'd only been out of office 90 days, you see, so this was kind of still, you know, touchy. And so I came up with it, and see what you think of this. I said, Mr. President, what do you think of our new president? This was Bush, all right? What do you think of our, what do you think of our new president? And his answer, this is why Clinton's such a great politician, I guess. He says, Larry, let me tell you what I think of our new president. He says, you know, I'm from Arkansas. In Arkansas, we don't know much. And we know we don't know. Now, Texas sits right below Arkansas. It's a huge place, but they don't know much either. But in Texas, they don't know they don't know. That's what I think. Well.
That's a great answer.
I am very excited to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Larry Farrell. Larry is the founder and CEO of the Farrell Company, which is the world's leading firm for researching and teaching entrepreneurial practices, and certainly entrepreneurism, entrepreneurship, very important issues in our state today. Mr. Farrell is really certainly has a diverse background that includes the Peace Corps, University of California Law School, Harvard Business School, positions as Vice President of American Express in New York, the President of Kepner Trago in Princeton, New Jersey, and as a board member of the Economic Development Society in the United States and the Journal of Strategic Change in London. He has a wealth of inspiring words and really very interesting perspective to share with us this evening. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Larry Farrell. Larry?
Let me start by just mentioning in this field of entrepreneurship, there are 3 major markets around the world for this that our company services.
And the number one is corporations, believe it or not. 70% of our worldwide business comes from large companies like IBM, Coca-Cola, and so on. And the reason for that is that even large companies today seem to realize that the real engine of growth is the entrepreneurial spirit. And once they begin to lose that, their growth is going to slow down and they're going to eventually evaporate and be overtaken by younger, more nimble companies. The way that I got into studying entrepreneurship probably will not be surprising to any of you who have ever started a business. I started a business in 1983 with this fellow, Tom Peters. Those of you that are over 45 years of age might even remember that name. He wrote In Search of Excellence, the top-selling business book in history. And I knew Tom Peters before he was so famous, and I started a business with him to create a training seminar for corporations based on his book. The book had sold 6 million copies in 1982, which was the biggest selling book in the history of American publishing, except for the Bible, right? So I said to myself, even though I had a pretty nice job at the time, I said to myself, this can't miss. This is too hot. So I quit a really good job, put a big mortgage against my house. My wife to this day has probably never forgiven me, right? But I started this business with Peters. A year and a half after this business started, Business Week magazine, and this gives you one point here. If anyone ever brings you an idea that seems too good to be true, watch out. 18 months after I started this business, trying to sell these seminars around the world, Business Week did an expose on that book, In Search of Excellence. Maybe some of you might remember that. The headline of the cover on Business Week was, "Oops, we made a mistake." The book, they said that 1/3 of the great companies that this guy Peters had written about were near bankruptcy only 2 years after the book had come out. And I learned this, I was in Tokyo when trying to sell the seminar to Texas Instruments Japan. And the Texas Instruments guy, Japanese guy, he held up the copy of Business Week magazine and said, "Mr. Farrell, have you seen this week's issue of Business Week?" And I said, "No, I really haven't." And he says, "Well, you should read this, and also, we're not interested, right, in your seminar." So immediately I said to myself, well, number one problem was I need a new product. This is going to sink like a stone in the lake, right? The second thing, more important to us here for this conversation, if the best-selling business book in history didn't hold up for even 24 months as the truth, where are we going to find the truth about how to grow a business, how to keep a business vibrant? What is the truth? I came up with the idea out of desperation, I admit, that maybe the truth lies more in the entrepreneurial phase of a company's growth, not in the mature phase. Instead of looking at IBM in 1982, maybe Tom Peters, he should have looked at IBM in 1920 when Thomas Watson started the company. What did Watson do to make IBM the 20th century's greatest company? Instead of looking at Disney in 1982, maybe he should have looked at Walt Disney in 1930, 1940, and so on. So I got taken up with this idea about entrepreneurship may be the real thing we can depend on, and what are the entrepreneurial practices? What are they all about? What did Walt Disney do? When I went to Harvard Business School, and we never had a single class or case study about Walt Disney. I'm sure that my professors there thought he was some kind of a cartoonist, and that was it, you see. Yet Disney created the greatest entertainment company in the history of the world. That's a real business lesson there to learn. So I got taken with this, began to research it, and the main thing I learned is that all companies, yours, mine, everybody's, big ones, live in a life cycle. And the life cycle has at least 4 important phases to it. Startup, high growth, phase 2. Phase 3 is tapering off, kind of decline. And finally, survival, death. Now these 4, in the first 2 phases, startup and high growth, which takes about 30 years for most companies, the dominant force in those companies is the entrepreneurial practices, the entrepreneurial spirit. If a company survives 20, 30 years, however, and is a good company, what's going to happen to it? If it grows 20% per year for 20, 30 years, it's going to get bigger. Has to. So at 30 years of age, 40 years of age, this company that used to be nimble, entrepreneurial, and so on, is now becoming a bit of a bureaucracy, slowing down. And the other thing I've learned about these entrepreneurial people is that when they retire, when they're 50 years old, 60 years old, and they retire, they never replace themselves with another entrepreneur. They reach into this bottomless pit of MBAs. And they grab these MBAs and bring them in to run this business. Kiss of death, all right? That's the end, all right? The MBAs driving the bureaucracy down the path. Now, I read your brochure here, and I know there's a few MBAs in the audience here, degrees. And let me just share with you, it's a cross we all have to bear, all right? We have to get over it somehow, all right? But, so what you have at 30, 40 years of age is a big company now, 5,000 employees, let's say, or maybe even 2,000, pretty good-sized company, run by managers. And the entrepreneurs have gone to where? Palm Beach, or they've retired. That's it, finished, okay? So this is a company that is apt to lose its entrepreneurial spirit completely. And it goes into phase 3, decline and survival. Now, on the management side, phase 3 and phase 4 of the company's life cycle, the dominant force is management, is management practices that you learn at business school and so on, right? And we know what they are: planning, leading, organizing, controlling, simple. On the left-hand side, the high growth, the startup and high growth phase, the entrepreneurial, but what are the key dominant entrepreneurial practices of those companies? What is it they actually do day in and day out to create that growth? That's what we want to know. And we've devoted our lives in my company to that research. And let me explain to you what the 4 things that we think are fundamental to creating a high growth company. The first practice that's essential is what we call a sense of mission. That entrepreneurial companies have this in spades, that they believe what they're doing is terribly important. It's going to save the world. Their product's the most wonderful thing. And if you know entrepreneurs, one thing they do is they talk too much. So they talk about their product or their business. Drive you nuts. And I've learned over the years, except when I want to interview one for serious reasons, if I'm sitting on a plane next to one, I don't want to strike up a conversation with an entrepreneur because they drive you nuts with this stuff, you know. And in fact, this is a true story. San Francisco, Singapore is about an 18-hour flight. I sat next to this young American guy once on the flight, and he didn't look like an entrepreneur. He looked kind of like an athlete. So I took a chance on the runway before we took off. I turned to him in my seat and said the 3 bad words, "How are you?" For the next 18 hours, this guy talks to me about his product, right? He never shut up. I couldn't shut him up. And what was his product? He had invented a machine that made perfect sand for the sand trap of a golf course, all right? Now, I'm sure golf's a wonderful game, but I don't play golf. I don't watch it on TV. I don't give a damn about golf, right? But 18 hours, I had to hear about this machine that made sand for the golf trap. What did this young man have? He had this. He had a sense of mission. He was out to save the world with his little product, okay? So that sense of mission example I like to use in a quick talk like this is the most exciting biotech company in the world, Decode Genetics, Kari Stephenson. Look what he says. We are studying the most sacred information that exists. They're trying to find the cause of the 12 major incurable diseases of the world. And they've made great success so far in 2, multiple sclerosis and breast cancer. So it's easy for him. Now, how do you get your people to have a sense of mission? That's your challenge. If you're selling shoes or video players, you've got to put that same kind of mission and show your people, we're doing important work here. We're doing something important. And remember this, why is it important for you to have this sense of mission for yourselves? If you're like me, most of us, I think, in this room, were not born rich. We have to work, right? If you have to work, you quickly find out that you're going to spend more time at work than with your family in your life. You're going to spend more time at work than with your friends. You're going to spend more time at work than any single activity of your life. So God help you if you don't have some sense of love and mission about what you do. Next slide. On customer product, here's Jobs. Look at what he says. Managing is the easy part. Inventing the world's next great product is the hard part. So to the entrepreneur, it's all about creating products the world will buy. Number 3, this is Morita. Where does innovation and high speed come from? Morita says anybody can move quickly when their life depends on it. See? If you become complacent in your business and things are going along too well for 5 or 10 years, guaranteed the employees and the management will become a bit complacent and slow down. Morita's trick, he's dead now, but his trick was that he would go in and he said this, he would try to create a small crisis in the company somewhere to keep people moving all the time. Next slide. Finally, on self-inspired, this is a great company next door, Cleveland, Ohio, Lincoln Electric. They're the world's largest manufacturer of welding equipment. They are the most entrepreneurial $2 billion company in the world. That's my belief. They have no pay structure. Everyone gets paid by piecework. Every good piece of welding equipment that comes off the line, the team that made that piece of welding equipment gets X amount of money. $800, I don't know what the amount is. If they send out off the line, the factory, a bad piece that can't be sold, they got to rework it for free. There's no pay. You only get paid for a saleable product. Now, this sounds 19th century. A lot of people think, oh, that's old-fashioned, you know, that's no good. No, it's entrepreneurial. You get paid for what you do, for what you produce. Lincoln Electric, they don't pay people to go to the toilet, have vacations, have lunch. No, they pay them to make welding equipment. But look at the quote. They are the highest paid factory workers in America. Right there in Cleveland, Ohio. They're making $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year making welding equipment. And I can tell you, I've been there, the employees love it. They absolutely love that pay system. Get paid for what you make. Right? Highly entrepreneurial. This is the great Disney quote. He was asked to describe his work life. Disney said, the inclination of my life has been to do things and make things which will give pleasure to people in new and amazing ways. By doing that, I please and satisfy myself. Those are the 4 practices I talked about before. Sense of mission, customer and product, innovation, creativity, innovation, and self-inspiration. So that's what entrepreneurship's all about. Have a wonderful dinner, dessert, and award ceremony. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
In Money Matters this morning, I'm sitting next to a noted expert on entrepreneurship and high growth companies this morning. Larry Farrell joins me to talk more about an event that's going on in Memphis, 3-day conference on energizing Memphis business. Larry also, by the way, is a noted scholar. This book is called Getting Entrepreneurial, Creating Growth and Growing Your Own Business in the 21st Century, noted consultant. Larry, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Greg. Happy to be here.
You're in Memphis, first of all, to meet with Mayor A.C. Wharton today to talk about what and entrepreneurs.
Yes, well, Memphis, like a lot of cities, states, and even countries, I think they've really gotten the message that the engine of prosperity is small business, entrepreneurial business. And you'll find governments around the world. I just came from Ireland, where the government of Ireland is doing this. They're trying to energize the entrepreneurial spirit in some way.
Are you going to tell the mayor, look, you got to give tax breaks, you got to give grants, you got to give loans? What are you going to tell the mayor when he is in a tight budget constraints?
Yeah, no, I'm not big on tax breaks. Entrepreneurs don't worry about tax policy. That's way down the road, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they never knew what the capital gains rate tax was when they started their business, I'm sure,
Yeah.
So it isn't that. What entrepreneurs need is an entrepreneur-friendly culture to work in where they got some mentors and peers going on around them. They do need a bit of money, not a lot. The average cost of starting a business in America is $14,000, so the government tells us. And most importantly, education. And it's not great business education, it's product education.
Well, let me tell you, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
People look at the headlines,
Yeah.
the recession, high unemployment, tight credit, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Recession.
Yeah.
I want to open up a business, leave the company I'm working for now with health benefits, salary, and vacation, maybe 401k if I'm lucky, to go out on my own?
Yeah, well, we tell our clients, don't quit your day job. You start these companies in the evening, on the weekend, before you quit your day job.
Really?
But recessions historically have been the time of entrepreneurial rise in activity, whether it was Japan after World War II or the U.S. and so on in the 70s. You'll find that entrepreneurship gets kicked up a lot, the tempo, during hard times, partly for economic reasons. People have lost their jobs and they can't find another job. They have to fend for themselves and they start a small business. And so to me, the recessions come and go. You know, the entrepreneurial activity should be a permanent part of our national ethos in this country. And it is. I mean, but we need to keep pushing it.
Good luck with your meeting with the mayor.
Great. Appreciate it.
Be careful. He has great colloquialisms based in Southern. Yet Friday was talking about kissing a pig and an alligator. I have to watch out for that.
One of the roles that leaders of government need to play, and sometimes don't, is they need to set a culture that is what I call entrepreneur friendly in the country. You need to have the entrepreneurs of Ireland become the folk heroes of the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing wrong with rock stars and football players and soccer and all that. They're wonderful people too, but you need to make sure that that you're honoring the Irish entrepreneurs and that young people look up to them and say, oh, I want to be another Richard Branson, or I want to be a Bill Gates. I'm interested in that kind of life and leaving those footprints in the sand.
Welcome back. Well, in the first half of our Business Profit Special this week, Larry Farrell was telling us how individuals and companies can be taught to be more entrepreneurial. Well, in his latest book, Farrell says that countries, entire economies can be taught to be more entrepreneurial. Well, that's a pretty big leap. How do you do that?
I think that we can apply this common sense of Mr. Honda, Mr. Disney, and so on to entire countries. You know, to me, that's important. So I'm finding in this book I'm writing now that, lo and behold, the same common sense principles can create prosperity for an entire nation of people.
This is not brain surgery. This is not flying to the moon. Entrepreneurship is basically common sense. Now, when my company, we give this exercise to students all around the world, whether it's in the US, or Brazil, or Singapore, or Germany, or Northern Ireland, one thing we've learned with this exercise, most of the answers that we receive back are more or less the same. You see? More or less the same. And when we first began using this exercise some 15 years ago in our classes, I thought, well, that's not good. The people already know the answers to the seminar. You see? What's the point of coming and spending money or whatever and spending time if they already know the answers? And then I began to realize, with more experience, the reason why Brazilians and Singaporeans and Americans and Northern Irelanders all more or less have the same answers in mind is we are basically talking about old-fashioned common sense. When you really ask a simple question, like what would you have to do to create a successful small company, right, and not go bankrupt and so on, your mind becomes very clear about what to do. It's an amazing thing. So, and it'd be interesting at the end of the day to see if you agree. The third wave that we're part of here began in the mid-'80s. A tremendous entrepreneurial boom around the world. And this one is different from all other ones in the past. Past entrepreneurial revolutions around the world, first of all, were limited to Northern Europe and US, basically. They were largely dominated by white males, okay? And it was a revolution led by elite people, already powerful and rich people many times. The revolution today is very different. It's worldwide, global in reach. There is a lot of money available to start businesses today. Unbelievable amounts of money if you add it all up around the world. Every government around the world is trying to help today, is trying to help someone start a company with low interest loans and so on. There's venture capital available. We call them angel investors. People with money who want to invest in your good idea. All right? Money will not be what prevents you from becoming a good entrepreneur, believe me. All right? In fact, people say to me, well, isn't money the real first initial problem? No. The number one reason for entrepreneurial failure is not a lack of money. It's not a lack of management know-how. It's a very simple, common sense thing. It's that you're not able to come up with a product or service that anybody wants to buy. It's very simple. You see? That leads to the next point. Building better mousetraps. The key to entrepreneurial success is to come up with a good idea. All right? Let's be honest. It's not about risk-taking. It's not about becoming a zillionaire. It's about coming up with a product or service that the world needs, or even Belfast needs locally. Better mousetraps. Huh? And the next one, very interesting. You know, we talk about in management circles, in large corporations, there's the so-called glass ceiling. Women, for example, for decades now, have been trying to break through the glass ceiling to become the chief executives of companies. It has been very difficult. Minorities, people of color, have been trying to break through. Right? In this arena of entrepreneurship, it is the ultimate meritocracy. You are on your own, but you are on your own as good, because nobody else can make you fail but yourself. There is a huge expectation here that you do not control your own destiny. Entrepreneurship allows you to do that. If you fail at entrepreneurship, you have no one to blame but yourself, which is a good feeling to have. On the positive side, every one of you in this room and everyone in the world should have the knowledge and the confidence to know that if you absolutely have to, you can defend yourself, you can support your family, you can create your own destiny. Every company, your new company, British Telecom and so on, follows a particular life cycle. There's a startup phase, a period of high growth. They become so big, they become like a bureaucracy. Things begin to slow down. Have you noticed that? Okay, in big companies. Phase 3, they go into a period of decline. And if they can't correct the situation, they go down here, survival and death. Now, it turns out that most of what modern managers learn if they go to business school or management school, most modern management ideas come from this side of the life cycle, studying the practices of giant companies. You might wonder, why would that be when so many giant companies are going out of business, right? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But my company, we began to study this side. What actually happens? What does the entrepreneur actually do day by day in a startup and the high growth phases of a new business? Very interesting question, because 20 years ago when I started, there were very few answers to that question. There was practically no research on that. Everyone still, this is 1983 when I began to do this research, everyone was still thinking, IBM is the best company in the world. They must know how to do it, you see? What happened to IBM? They downsized 180,000 people during the 80s. So why would you want to emulate the practices of IBM? Why don't you emulate? The problem is, when you think about the IBMs of the world and so on, we don't want to study IBM in 1990 in the year 2000. We want to study IBM back in 1918 when Mr. Watson founded the 20th century's greatest company. We don't want to study the Disney company today. We want to study it in the 30s and 40s when Mr. Walt Disney created the world's greatest entertainment company. We don't want to even study Apple Computer today. We want to find out what Steve Jobs at Apple Computer did in 1976 when he created the fastest growing company in America in history. Those early years, early decades, that's what we want to understand, because that's what you're going to face. How do you get started, and how do you create a better mousetrap, and how do you grow your enterprise? What you need to know is, what are the principles on this side of the chart? What are the practices of entrepreneurs? What are the practices of high growth? And that's what the seminar is about. That's what I'll tell you right now. Number one, the first fundamental characteristic of great entrepreneurs is that they believe that what they're doing is important. They believe it. You may not think it's important what they're doing, but they think it's important. We call it having a sense of mission about your business. Number two, if anyone ever asks you, what are the most important ideas of any business? Here they are. Customer, product. You cannot have a business without these two things. And for product, it can be service or product, okay? The two absolutely fundamental essentials of any enterprise: you must have a product that somebody somewhere will pay you money for. You cannot avoid that. Those of you that are younger, perhaps, thinking about the high-tech millionaires of Silicon Valley and so on, what happened to all those dot-com companies? What happened to them? They forgot this. The dot-com, the high-tech people, they were completely focused on product, but they forgot to ask the second question: does anybody need my product? Yes, high-tech people today, computer people, they can invent many wonderful things. But most of what they invent, we don't need. We try to make it, in fact, one word: customer/product. It is a single integrated concept. You cannot have a business without both. All right? Number three, once you have this in place, how are you going to compete? The entrepreneur's secret weapon is this: high-speed innovation. Outthinking your competitors, being creative and innovative, doing something a little better, a little faster, or a little cheaper than your competition. That's innovation. All right? So the nice thing about thinking, the nice thing about being innovative in your business, it doesn't cost money to think. See, most of what you do in business, advertising, hiring a salesman, and so on, costs money. To think is free. This is why innovation is so powerful. And this is why small companies, it's the #1 competitive advantage you will have against bigger companies, is this one. Because British Telecom has a very hard time today moving quickly and coming out with anything new. It may take them 5 years to come out with something new. Your advantage as a small business is you can do it almost tomorrow. You see? Okay. Number four, the fourth principle of entrepreneurship. You see how simple this is? It's common sense, right? So far. Number four is truly about us, about people. All right? Self-inspired behavior. Self-motivated. All entrepreneurs have this. But the important question for us is, where does it come from? Does it come from our grandfathers and fathers? In other words, is it a genetic trait to be self-motivated? If that's the case, I give up. What can I do? My father was a lazy bum. Okay? So there's no hope for me. All right? Not true. That's the good news. Not true. What creates inspired people is the circumstances you find yourself in. It may be 1% unexplainable genes, but it's 99% environment. So, these four principles are the basis of 20 years of research of what entrepreneurs actually have to be good at and do and concentrate on. Now, what you don't see there is anything terribly complicated and sophisticated. And in fact, America's greatest entrepreneur of the 20th century is this man, Walt Disney, I think. He said this: the inclination of my life has been to do things and make things which will give pleasure to people in new and amazing ways. By doing that, I please and satisfy myself. 4 points he makes. The inclination of my life, the mission of my life, my sense of mission, has been to do things and make things, products, making products, which will give pleasure to people, customers, people being customers, product, customer, in new and amazing ways. Creative, innovative, something innovative. And finally, by doing that, I please and satisfy myself. I am inspired by my own work. That's what turns me on. What's required for you to become an entrepreneur? 3 things. Number 1, and you'll find many booths out here. As I walked through this morning, there's help on these things in Northern Ireland. There's help right in this exhibition. Number 1, you need an entrepreneur-friendly culture. This means everything from government policy of the country down to your family. You need the support of your family, your spouse, your kids to do this, all right? This is important. You cannot work in an alien, cold culture where everyone's against you becoming an entrepreneur and be successful. Number 1, entrepreneur-friendly culture. Number 2, a bit of money. We'll talk about that in just a second. And number 3, a bit of knowledge, all right? In terms of the culture, one of the great British entrepreneurs, Branson, I like this. One of my advantages is I don't have a highly complicated view of business. Keep it simple. Most of the money to start new businesses in America comes from personal savings or credit cards. I'm not an advocate of financing your business with credit cards, but I'm telling you, if the average cost in America to start a business is only $14,000, small. This is the average. Anybody can come up with $14,000 if you have 1 or 2 credit cards, believe me, okay? So money is not the inhibitor, all right? General graduates of a university are twice as likely to start their own business as an MBA. Who are starting businesses around the world today? People who know something about a product. This is why engineering is still so important. This is why mathematics and physics and science and even the fine arts. You go to these universities or technical schools to learn how to do something practical and useful that the world needs.
He's a blind cattle rustler. He went to jail for stealing cattle.
That's right.
But he turned it around.
That's right. I interviewed, his name is Buell Messer. He's down in the state of Virginia. And I interviewed Mr. Messer because I couldn't understand how could a blind man found a landscaping empire. And when I was interviewing him, I learned he'd been in prison earlier as a young guy. And I said, well, what was your crime? And he said, well, I rustled cattle. And I said, well, how does a blind man rustle cattle? And his answer was classic, not very well. That's why I went into landscaping. You know?
Plus, it's a sin in cow country if you rustle cattle.
That's right.
It's a crime, but it's a sin,
Messer
too.
is an example, Fanny, of this sense of mission. He has a burning mission in life to redeem his character, for one thing, and do something useful with his life. And he doesn't let blindness or stand in the way of anything. You see, that's amazing. Those are motivational stories, but they're true stories.
Sure.
They happen.
Larry Farrell is a businessman whose ideas about entrepreneurship in the third world are absolutely fascinating.
Larry, you have been around business and involved in business in so many different ways. Your passion is entrepreneurship. Why should young people care about becoming an entrepreneur?
Well, certainly when I grew up, you know, the world labor market was different than today. My grandfather, perhaps even your grandfather, could look forward to working for 1 or 2 companies all their life.
Yeah, it's staying pretty stable.
Retire with a pension, health care, and so on. That world is gone forever, all right? And one of the interesting applications of entrepreneurship, I think, is for young people to begin to learn that this isn't brain surgery. This isn't that hard to do, to be self-employed entrepreneur yourself. And I've become very passionate about that aspect. Kind of a corollary to that, Randall, is that entrepreneurship is a tremendous, perhaps the best economic tool ever invented for poor people.
Really?
Yeah.
Like you're trying to tell me, you're saying entrepreneurship can help impoverished places?
Absolutely. And I'm happy to say, of course, I've been in business 25 years teaching this. My biggest client in the world is an organization called Junior Achievement. And they're based in the U.S., but they operate in 140 countries. They reach 7 million children a year. They have adopted my program, and they're teaching it around the world now to 16, 17, and 18-year-old kids.
Wow.
So to me, this is a bit of a legacy for me.
Do you ever see this, your program, these entrepreneurial ideas catching on in like Africa or Asia, places where kids would usually be, you know, on the street?
Yeah, we did a project in a prison in South Africa for juveniles who were on their way out of prison, and they had absolutely no chance of getting a job at a company. No one's going to hire these kids. They're mostly black criminals, okay? So, but they were skilled kids, you know, with their hands and all. So they were going through vocational type training to learn to be carpenters and all that. And we were hired to come in and show them how simple it is really to be a self-employed carpenter, a self-employed mechanic, and have a little sign set up at your house.
And now you're your own boss.
Now you're your own boss.
And no one can fire you or get rid of you.
This is important stuff. If it were 1945 again, I don't think it'd be that important, because there's plenty of good jobs in 1945 for our parents to go to.
Yeah.
But today it's a downsized and uncertain world, and you got to learn to fend for yourself a little bit more.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today. It's
You're
really,
welcome.
really interesting.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. And here's a young lady who is after my own heart. Ashley Hood. She started a restaurant in some place called Colliersville Town Square. Okay. She started a restaurant. She graduated from high school and used her $60,000 college fund. Instead of going to college, used the money to buy and renovate an old building and start a restaurant. You see, this is the wave of the future, folks, all right? I guess she could have gone to work for General Motors and taken her chances, but she preferred to fend for herself. So I was real pleased to see that in the paper here. The Farrell Company's been around since 1983. I founded this company to do one thing, really, is to research and learn how, if it's possible, to teach entrepreneurship. We thought we'd try to do that. I believe that we have now educated more people in entrepreneurship than any university or private company in the world. 75% of our business has always been overseas. We're very international. We have 22 little offices around the world that we try to promote. The courses are taught in 7 or 8 languages. There are 3 markets that are interesting for entrepreneurship these days. One is the corporate market, as Ray mentioned. The IBMs of the world, when I started this in '83, it was very difficult to get Coca-Cola, IBM, or anyone like that to say, why should we train our managers to be more entrepreneurial in their job? You know, we're IBM, we don't need that. Today, corporate entrepreneurship, as it's sometimes called, is pretty mainstream kind of thinking. They want their managers to be more innovative, as this from FedEx there, she's heading the innovation task force, I guess, at FedEx. Be more innovative, act like they in fact own a piece of the rock and all that, you know, that kind of thing. So corporations have been our main market, large companies. Second market here is government. And this has only come about in the past 10 years. Every government, city, county, state, country around the world, including the United Nations, has an agency today for fostering entrepreneurial development, small business. I mean, it's a very popular thing in economic government circles today. They finally figured out it's a good investment. It's one of the better uses of taxpayers' money, is to try to help the economy by fostering more small business. We've had projects in Northern Ireland, Brazil, New York City, Louisville, Kentucky, all around, trying to do that. That's fun work. Our most challenging contracts right now are with we're working with 3 American Indian tribes, the Cherokee and the Chickasaw in Oklahoma and the Apache in Arizona. These are very challenging things, but on any economic scale, the American Indian is at the very bottom of the list. And so we're proud to be a part of the effort to help American Indians start small businesses on their own reservations and with their own economy, that sort of thing. But down to the real love of my life is the individual, teaching individual people, and particularly youngsters, that at the end of the day, we want them to have the confidence and the skill to know that if they have to or want to, they can start a small business and fend for themselves. Now, never in American history has there been a time when this is more needed than today. We don't need this past week's headlines to tell us that. It's been going on for quite a while now, that the job market that the youngsters in America are facing is unlike anything you ever saw or your parents ever saw. When your parents and grandparents were coming up, and I suspect most of you, there were in fact good jobs available. There were high-paying jobs. We have now shipped 30 million high-paying jobs overseas in 30 years. The salary component of the national GDP is at its lowest level since 1947. Right? So your kids are facing a totally different job market than you faced. All right? This is why I'm such a believer in the Junior Achievement Mission, and why I'm so proud to be a part of their effort to begin to teach entrepreneurship at middle school and high school levels. In the high school program, our goal is very clear. We want juniors and seniors in high school through Junior Achievement to literally start a business, like this young lady here in Memphis, that they may very well carry on. They may not even go to college. They may carry on this business instead, okay? So that's kind of a background here. My first business venture, when I started my first company, was in partnership with Tom Peters. Anybody here old enough to remember Tom Peters? Okay, great guy, smart guy. He wrote this book, In Search of Excellence. And so I quit a really good job, a high-paying job, to join Peters to start a company to run a training seminar based on his best-selling book. Now this book, In Search of Excellence, sold 6 million copies in 1982. That made it the best-selling book in American publishing history next to the Bible. So I said to myself, this can't miss. What a golden opportunity. Now, if anyone ever comes to you with an opportunity that can't miss, think twice about it, because it may not be quite as golden as it sounds at first, you know. But 18 months after I started the business to try to promote and deliver and sell his training programs based on his book, Business Week magazine comes out with a cover story, oops, we made a mistake. They detailed in this article how the book was mostly nonsense, and that 1/3 of the companies Peters was touting were near bankruptcy only 18 months after the book was published. You see? So this is what we get in America. We get so much nonsense about business. But I had a particular problem. I thought to myself, this is the worst publicity a little business could ever have, because our product was based on the book. And I said, smart me, I need a new product. This isn't going to work, you know. I've got a mortgage on my house now and all that. So I came up with this thought that instead of looking at IBM in the 80s, as Peters did, or instead of looking at Disney in the 80s, when they were already, you know, $100 billion companies or whatever, maybe we should have looked at IBM in the 20s when Thomas Watson founded the 20th century's greatest company. You know, what did he do? How did he get IBM going in the 20s and 30s and 40s? Instead of looking at Disney at its current stage, maybe we should look at Walt Disney in the 30s, 40s, and 50s when he founded the world's greatest entertainment company. So I got very interested in the entrepreneurial phase of all these big companies, okay? And it turns out to be that's the high growth phase for most big companies, is the first 10, 20, 30 years. So we began to research all that, and when you do that, you begin to come across some really crazy statistics, which I'm sure you've read since then. 33% of the excellent companies were failing only 2 years after the book was written, and it was a bestseller, you see. So I always think to myself now, don't read these business book bestsellers. I mean, this may lead you down the wrong path, you know, or be very suspicious of them. Even more telling, of the 100 largest companies in America in the year 1900, how many still in business today? Roughly 16, about 16, 17, something like that. 84% failure rate of giant companies. What happened to those companies? Huh? The Fortune 500 was introduced in 1955. That list from 1955, if you look at it, compare it to today's list, 70% of those companies are gone, you see? So, I mean, on the negative side, you got to say, what happens to big business when it gets so big? On the positive side, maybe the idea is, well, there's a lot of entrepreneurs keep coming along and inventing new businesses, you know? So it could be a glass half full, a glass half empty, but the fact is, being big doesn't guarantee longevity, all right, as we saw this week in Wall Street, okay? The final crowning glory for me on my research was the great, wonderful Peter Drucker. I do love, he died several years ago, but he saw a talk like this, and he stood up afterwards, and I thought, if Dr. Drucker, the world's greatest management expert, comes up and says, this guy Larry is an idiot, you know, it's going to be another Tom Peters Business Week moment for me, right? He could ruin my career for the second time, the second visit. Instead, Dr. Drucker stood up and said, Larry's onto something here. Bigger is better is a big myth. The best, he said, went on to say, the best companies in America are the mid-sized companies, not the giants and that sort of thing. And Larry Farrell has explained why. Now, what he was referring to, and I hope this is of interest to all of you here, this is the basis of our own thinking, our own research about entrepreneurship. We're very interested in the first two steps of the life cycle. Every company goes through a life cycle. Small, medium, giant, doesn't matter. There's a life cycle that companies tend to follow. And it's these phases. In the startup phase, if you've ever been in a startup business, which most of you probably have, your own businesses, a startup time is exciting. If you've ever started something new, it's the most exciting time in your life, perhaps, you know. Unfortunately, 60, 70% of those startups fail, right? Number one reason for small business failure in America is not lack of money. It is not lack of management. It is because you haven't come up with a product that anybody wants to buy. That's number one reason for failure. So given that, if you're in the lucky 1/3 where you in fact have a product or service that someone wants to buy, you go to phase 2, which is a period of relative high growth. This can last for 20 years, 30 years even. You're going to grow at 20%, 30%, maybe 35% per year for 20, 30 years, okay? Because and most of this growth is usually based on the strength of one great product or one great family of products, okay? It is not a conglomerate, it is not all this nonsense. It is focused on a great product, all right? But what happens to your company if you grow 30% for 30 years? For one sure thing is you're going to get big. You used to have 5 employees, you now got 5,000. You used to have meetings that lasted 20 minutes in the parking lot. Now you go off to Bermuda for a meeting, you see? You used to be able to decide your own strategy. Now you got to hire McKinsey to tell you what to do, you see? All this stuff happens as your company gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And what is going on by the time you hit the apex there, the top line, is you're rapidly becoming another bureaucracy. You've slowed down.
If I run out of people who love to win, I'll take people who hate to lose. Now, the typical Perot comment, but the reason I got interested in Perot is that, as you heard in the introduction, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And in 1978, I was in the Middle East in Iran, trying to close our office. The revolution was just starting, tanks in the streets, really kind of a mess. And I got stuck in Iran, like a lot of Americans and businessmen. And I was put under house arrest, took my passport and all that. And you sit there for days wondering what the hell's going to happen to me, you see? I finally got out with the help not of my company, but of Air France. A guy helped me out. I put an Air France jacket on, went out on the runway in the middle of the night, climbed up a rope ladder to an Air France 747 that was there just to refuel. But when I got home from that trip, a month or so later, I read in the paper what Mr. Perot had sent these commandos. You remember those guys, those Green Beret type guys, over there in a helicopter and rescued his 2 executives right out of the prison. See? And it made a book and a movie on Wings of Eagles. I turned to my wife and I said, do you think my company was going to send commandos for me? You know, this is what I'm talking about. A leader needs to demonstrate commitment and performance to his people or to her people. This is what Perot did in spades, regardless of what else he may have done. But I was in Beijing in 1981 giving a talk on long-range planning. Can you imagine? You know, we Americans were in Beijing telling them how to plan, you see. And, at the end of this talk, an elderly Chinese man came up from the back. And in 81, they were still wearing blue uniforms in China, in the mainland. This elderly man came up to me and said, you know, Mr. Farrell, in very broken English, he said, you're the first American I've seen since 1945. We thank you very much for coming to China. We have missed a lot of information about business, and we thank you for coming. But the thing I really want to learn, and you didn't talk about it, can you teach me? And he took from his pocket a piece of paper on which he had carefully written the word entrepreneur. Can you teach me to be this?
This is this book, Getting Entrepreneurial, that JA has adopted for their high school program. This book is in Chinese. There it is in Chinese. The Chinese like to put dollar signs and money, because to them it's all about making money, you know. I told them, I said, the Chinese editor, I said, listen, my book is not about making money. My book is about following your dream, you know, blah, blah. And they said, oh, okay, Mr. Farrell. Then the cover comes out all about money. You say, this is Chinese. But anyway, so for the last 2 years, it's been on the business book bestseller list in China. So I'm very proud of that. As if the Chinese need to read my book, right? If I had to give any student one lesson, one thing, it is get good at something. Go to school and learn how to do something and be the best in the county at that, or the best in the country. Learn how to make or do something somebody needs if you want to be an entrepreneur. That's the most important basic thing. And we tell all of our students, there's 3 questions you have to ask yourself to find that right product for yourself. What do I love to do? Because what am I good at doing? And that can be adjusted. You could get education to make yourself good at it. But what do I love to do? What am I good at doing? And what needs do I see in the marketplace for those kinds of ideas that I have? And within those 3 questions, you will find a high success ratio of a product or service.
One really nice thing about being in South Africa at this time is that most of us don't get a chance to live in an important time in history in our society. If you think about it, very few people have that opportunity. And what happens in South Africa over the next 5 years is going to be in the history books 500 years from now. There's absolutely no question about that. Right? So you're living in an epical time. And I wish you the very, very best and Godspeed.
Walt Disney. Who better?
Now, here's the thing. At Harvard Business School, we never had a single class on Walt Disney. I think my professors at that time considered him just kind of a cartoonist. He wasn't a business person. He turns out to be the greatest entrepreneur perhaps of the 20th century. I mean, he created the greatest entertainment company in the history of the world. We didn't study him. You see?
Yeah.
You know, and this is what I mean. This is the mistake. This is the myth, you know. Walt Disney was good at making something the world wanted to see. This is old-fashioned common sense. It's not brain surgery that we're talking about here in entrepreneurship. Anybody listening to this, I'm convinced, anybody can be a successful entrepreneur if you follow just a couple of simple rules, not based on Larry Farrell's knowledge, based on the great experiences of the great entrepreneurs of the world, in Vancouver, to London, to New York, to China.